This is Word on the Reef, where marine science meets adventure. Join Tanya Murphy and Brett Goodban as we plunge into the wonders of the Great Barrier Reef and explore the mysteries beneath the waves. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Word on the Reef. I'm your host, diver and marine conservationist Tanya Murphy, and joining me, as always, is Cairns Aquarium's marine educator and fish whisperer, Brett Goodban.
Good morning.
Now, Brett,
Yes.
Today let's step into our time machine once again and travel back 176 years ago,
Right.
just before the colony of Queensland was founded and the first farms began to appear in Queensland. At that point in time, the coastline, along what we now call the Great Barrier Reef, is a paradise untouched by bulldozers or ploughs, free from fertilisers, pesticides and herbicides. Thick forests blanket the landscape, teeming with birds and wildlife. These forests are the filters of the waterways, holding the riverbanks together, preventing erosion and soaking up excess nutrients.
Yeah.
There are some sediments and nutrients in the water, especially during the wet season floods, but just enough to keep the nutrient cycle in balance and the waters of the Great Barrier Reef clean and healthy.
Yeah.
Fast forward to today. Water quality on the Great Barrier Reef has declined so significantly that the World Heritage Committee has told the Australian government to take stronger action on water pollution or risk the reef being added to the World Heritage in Danger list. And believe it or not, the water quality impacts that we're seeing in the ocean are a reflection of what is happening on land.
Yes.
Of course, the reef is enormous and there are still many places, especially on the outer reef, where you can dive into water so clear you can see 50 metres, surrounded by beautiful coral gardens. But some inshore areas in particular are suffering severe impacts from polluted water and excessive sediment as a result of land-based runoff. So here to explain what's happening and how we can help fix it is Dr. Max Hirschfeld, Great Barrier Reef Water Quality Manager at the Australian Marine Conservation Society. Good morning, Dr. Hirschfeld. Welcome to Word on the Reef.
Hey, good morning, Tanya and Brett. I'm really happy I can finally be on your show.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. This will be a really good chat, buddy. Thank you.
Great
Thanks.
to have you on the show. First up, can you please tell us a bit about yourself and your background?
Yeah, I actually grew up in Munich, Germany, so close to the mountains, to the Alps in Europe. And I literally grew up running around through the woods and going hiking with my parents, wearing a little lederhosen and everything.
Oh, lederhosen, of course. All Germans.
Yeah, exactly. So it wasn't until 2008 when I went to the Red Sea to volunteer in a conservation organization there and learned to dive and dove into magnificent coral reefs there and was just blown away, of course. And since then, I've been lucky enough to study and work in some really amazing coral reef systems around the world, including in the Indian Ocean, the Red Sea, of course. I spent a number of years in the Galapagos Islands, and I've worked with some really cool critter also, things like sharks and rays, sea lions, marine iguanas, sea turtles, all of the good stuff, really.
Wow, that sounds amazing.
Yeah. It's only about 9 years ago when I came to Australia to study a PhD at James Cook University up in Townsville and looking at populations of coral reef-associated sharks in the Great Barrier Reef and also in the Coral Sea Marine Park that's off the continental shelf into the Australian Ocean.
Wow, well, that's a resume.
Yeah, we get the opportunity to be jealous of almost everyone that we interview.
Yeah, we do. Yeah.
Wish I could have lived every single one of those lives.
Pretty cool.
The Galapagos is definitely on my bucket list. It's one of the world's greatest aggregation sites for different sharks like hammerheads.
Yep. I'll get there one day.
It's on our list.
You will.
It's on our growing and expanding and very expensive bucket list.
Yeah.
Okay, so when people visit the Great Barrier Reef, most of us are really careful not to throw trash overboard or put chemicals into the water because we can see there's a beautiful ecosystem in the waves beneath us. But few people truly understand how our actions on land are impacting the reef. So how is what we do on land connected to the Great Barrier Reef, Max?
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess, as you say, a lot of people think of the Great Barrier Reef of something that's out there in the ocean and far away from the coast, looking pristine, clear water. And that's kind of the picture it jumps into mind when you think about the Great Barrier Reef. But yeah, I want to paint a little bit of a picture here to make us think of the Great Barrier Reef and the entire region as a much bigger connected system. And I think it's interesting how we often say that the Great Barrier Reef is a similar size to some of the European countries like Italy and things like that.
Mm-hmm. It's huge.
But I think what's very interesting, yeah, it's giant and very long, of course. But I think what's really interesting here is that the area of the Great Barrier Reef catchment, so everything that includes where water runs off the land or through the soil into our rivers and streams that then ends up in the ocean and in the Great Barrier Reef Lagoon, that whole area is actually larger than the Great Barrier Reef area itself. And there's over 35 major river catchments, and some of them, including the Burdekin River, are over 700 kilometers long and reach more than 350 kilometers inland.
Yeah, because you've got the Mitchell River as well, haven't we? That can burst its banks 50 kilometres on each side in the wet season.
Wow.
Massive.
Yeah, so incredible areas. And so everything that kind of happens in that area is intricately linked to what happens in the ocean and the Great Barrier Reef.
Yeah, you can't throw anything in the air around here without it ending up on the reef, pretty much.
Yeah.
Pretty much, yeah.
All just flows down into the reef.
Yes, it does.
Yeah, so weren't you telling me that we have a river here that's got the same volume of flow as the Yangtze River in China, that famously one of the biggest rivers, I guess, in the world?
Yeah, so the Burdekin River in the Great Barrier Reef catchment is actually the river with the highest volume of discharge that ends up in the ocean in Australia. And yeah, it's comparable to some of the big, known big rivers in the world. Mm-hmm. And yeah, just kind of underlines, how much of the stuff from the land ends up in the ocean.
Yeah, that's right. And it's also important, I mean, a lot of people don't realise this, and I tell them at work when I do my river shows, is estimated 50,000 times the volume of Sydney Harbour lands in rainfall up on that Gulf Savannah every year.
Wow.
I mean, that's just a colossal amount of water, isn't it?
Yep, it does rain a lot here in the
yes,
wet
absolutely,
tropics.
and it all heads out to the reef. So that's why this connection is so important, isn't it?
Yeah.
So, Max, what are the main sources of water pollution that are ending up in this catchment and ending up on the Great Barrier Reef? And how does each pollutant impact the marine ecosystem?
So overall, just in numbers, most of the major pollutants, so sediment and nitrogen pollutant, and also many of the fertilizers or herbicides, they come from agriculture. And again, to paint this picture, that whole catchment area in the Great Barrier Reef, more than 80% of that is under some form of agriculture. So it gives you an idea of the scale of things.
Wow.
So in percentage numbers, most of the pollutants come from that area.
Yeah, and it's also just for our listeners that, because I hear this quite a lot at work where they say, you've got to have high nutrient out on the reef, but that's not the case. High nutrient is not good for the coral. It's not good for the reef, is it?
No, yeah. So the nutrients in particular, what they do, they can create algal blooms, for example, and just growth of phytoplankton, so microscopic algae that lives in the water column. And what that does, obviously, it blocks out sunlight that can't reach corals, for example, and the corals need sunlight to photosynthesize, etc. And also seagrass, for example. The Great Barrier Reef has a huge amount of seagrass. The area of seagrass in the Great Barrier Reef is actually equivalent to what's there in terms of corals. Mm-hmm. So all of these systems are hugely impacted if there's too much nutrients and you have that algal overgrowth and less sunlight available to those ecosystems, which again then has this cascading effect to other organisms such as iconic dugongs and sea turtles that really rely on seagrass meadows, for example, as a primary food source. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yes, we had a really great interview on the show a few weeks back with Dr. Tim Smith, who is doing seagrass replanting and restoration projects near Cairns and Marillion Harbour, because all of the seagrass, pretty much all of it, was wiped out by sediment and floodwaters. And then that has the flow-on effect to the turtles and dugongs that need to eat that. So the misconception that nutrients are good for the reef, I mean, 176 years ago, there was a balance of the right amount of nutrients that the reef needed. The reef didn't need us to come along and pour more nutrients onto it than what it naturally had. And that's unfortunately what's happening now. So you're talking about 80% of the reef catchment is farmland. What types of farming are the main dominant ones?
Yeah, so mainly sugarcane, especially further up north, and then where it gets a bit dry, a bit further down south, we've got a lot of large cattle farms. So those are the primary ones, but then there's a lot of horticulture coming up, including macadamia and avocado farms, etc. But in terms of size and area, definitely the cattle and sugarcane is sort of the two primary ones.
Yeah, look, farming's really important to Queensland, and we love our farmers. That's how we get our beautiful fruit and veg and food. But I suppose it's just the way that farming has historically been done, and how we can do it better is what needs to be looked at. And so there's various inputs from farming. There's obviously herbicides, glyphosate, there's pesticides, but the big one that you find is nitrogen fertilizer. That's the biggest pollutant on the Great Barrier Reef, isn't it?
Yes, so both, I guess, nitrogen from the overuse of fertilizer that gets flushed out into the reef is one of the big ones, and then also sediment, which is practically just loose soil that gets washed off into the rivers and streams and ends up on the reef. So those are the two big ones that have changed very significantly over the last couple hundred years due to the development also. And yeah, as you said, it's also what we've done over hundreds of years practically, and how we've changed the landscape. So it's not only what a single farmer is doing right now on their land, but it's also how we've changed the landscape so it can't really filter some of the pollutant before they actually end up in the waterways.
Yes, we've got a lot of historical issues that we have to fix. So some chemicals that were used in the past, even if we stop using them now, it's going to take a while before they sort of make their way out of the system. Some of those chemicals are known as forever chemicals, aren't they? So we've got a lot of fixing up to do from the things in the past. So I know there are some types of chemicals that are allowed to be used in Australia which are actually banned in Europe, like neonicotinoid pesticides. They're banned in Europe because they're killing all the bees, which we need to pollinate our farms. But those are still allowed in Australia. And yeah, I think there's various other chemicals, like glyphosate is limited in some places of the world, and I know that it's still allowed in a lot of areas of Australia. But as you say, erosion and nitrogen fertiliser are the biggest ones. Dr. Hirschfeld, can you tell us a bit more about erosion and sediment impacts?
Yeah, so sediment is one of the other big pollutants, and of course, if you think of sediment, it is ultimately soil, different sizes, etc. So it can be very fine, it can be a bit more coarse, but the idea is that it does naturally occur, of course, on our land and in our rivers, and some of it also on the reef, but not in the volume that it's currently ending up in those systems. And so what that does, it primarily comes from erosion, which is also because we have cleared too many vegetation, so forests and particularly vegetation along our rivers and streams.
So our mangrove areas.
Yeah, estuaries, mangrove areas, even far upstream inland on rivers and streams that stabilize the riverbanks. So all the roots stabilize the soil, and so there's much less runoff of that earth into the reef ultimately. But we've changed a lot of that, and there's some efforts to restore these systems, which is great, but it's not going to be enough if we don't speed it up and also just make sure we're not clearing any of these really critical ecosystems and vegetation. And so this is where we need to work very closely with the landholders, the farmers, to make sure they're not clearing the really critical areas, and that we can work together and restore some of the places that we've unfortunately lost.
Yeah, deforestation is a big one. 20% of Queensland's vegetation has been lost since colonisation, and a lot of land clearing is continuing today, unfortunately. There are nature protection laws, but there's a lot of loopholes which are enabling tree clearing to continue, and the majority of it is for cattle grazing for beef production. 1 million hectares of forest and bushland has been cleared since 2022 in Queensland. Queensland, and nearly half of that was in reef catchments. So when we're trying to protect the water quality of the Great Barrier Reef, and we've got animals like the koala becoming endangered, it's just crazy to think that in the last 3 years we've cleared another 1 million hectares.
Yeah, it's just heart-wrenching.
This is a very dear issue to my heart, the fact that Australia is one of the deforestation hotspots of the world. It's the only developed country on the deforestation hotspot list, and Queensland is the biggest deforester in Australia. A lot of people are shocked.
Yeah, a lot of people
this.
wouldn't know that.
Especially when I talk to tourists from overseas, they have this shining reputation of Australia as, it's got so much unique wildlife, it's got the Great Barrier Reef, it's got rainforests. Obviously, Australians must be doing a really good job of protecting it. People are shocked to find out that we have really high deforestation rates and that our koalas have gone endangered, largely due to habitat destruction within the last few years. You know, it's one of our iconic animals, and under our watch, we've allowed it to go on the endanger list. And then, of course, the same with the Great Barrier Reef. So, sorry, that's just I just am mind blown.
It's important, Tanya, because a lot of our listeners are from overseas as well, and a lot of locals, and it's important for people to get the updates and understand what's going on at the moment. Yeah, it's terrible.
I agree. I mean, it's those particular things that people come to see, right? So just having an understanding of some of the things that are unfortunately still going on. And as you said, you know, almost half of the tree clearing is in reef catchments. And unfortunately, the laws and government oversight, a lot of the tree clearing is actually happening in really critical areas, as I said, for example, along rivers and streams. So being able to close some of those loopholes and at least stopping deforestation in the areas that can cause the biggest harm to both terrestrial wildlife but also the reefs, I think that's kind of where we need to head.
Yeah, you can really see the difference when you walk along riverbanks that have been deforested. They're just crumbling away every, wet season. They lose several metres of land into the river, and all that mud's just going and getting dumped out onto the reef. A really confronting example recently of just how deadly that sediment-laden water can be for the reef was unfortunately seen with extreme rainfall events and floods over the past few years. Can you tell us a bit about the impacts of those floodwaters on the reef over the recent years, Max?
Yeah, as you said, unfortunately, the last 2 summers, we've seen some really extensive major flooding along the Great Barrier Reef coast.
Which has been worsened by climate change, of course, so the extremeness of the floods and rainfall is probably going to continue getting worse, and then that mixes with the water quality issues, and what impact is that causing?
Yeah, exactly as you say. I mean, unfortunately, these events are increasing in magnitude and frequency. So, yeah, floods existed in the past, of course, but just frequency and magnitude is increasing, and then just the amount of pollutants and sediment that's being washed off the eroded land is just much higher now. And so that's really having a huge impact on the reef. And so with a lot of heavy rainfall, obviously the fertilizers that are supposed to stay on land and on farms to be absorbed by plants is going to get washed off. And then a lot of the vegetation that's been cleared, where there's bare land, and after the dry season, a lot of that stuff gets washed out. And last year, we've had huge floods more in the central Great Barrier Reef, and the flood plumes reached out 100 kilometers offshore, and that just really highlights again how connected the land is to the Great Barrier Reef. And you could, see big flood plumes with murky water reaching even reefs that are 100 kilometers offshore, and it was stretching along over 700 kilometers along the coast.
And it's probably important to remind everyone to stop thinking about the Great Barrier Reef and land being completely different. It's just one big unit that needs to work together, isn't it?
Imagine if everything on the entire planet was one connected whole.
Oh, that's deep.
We are all one. A butterfly flapping its wings on one side of the world.
The reef can't survive without the land, and vice versa. So that's how people need to look at it.
Absolutely. Everything's connected, and if we were to have listened to the traditional owners to begin with, we would have known that a long time ago. Okay, so you've mentioned these devastating floods with muddy, pollution-laden waters being washed out further than they normally do, all the way out 100 kilometres offshore. And I've actually had to witness the impacts of that firsthand, because these floodwaters from after Cyclone Jasper washed over iconic snorkel sites like the Low Isles off of Port Douglas. Absolutely beautiful, beautiful place to go snorkeling. It still is, but I did see the before and after impacts of those floodwaters. And within days of being smothered by this murky floodwater, it pretty much died. And the giant clams died, even though they were, over 100 years old, which means they've survived multiple flood events in the past.
Shows you how bad it was.
But this one killed them. And giant clams grow really slowly, so we're not going to see them getting to that big giant size again for a while in that spot.
It's devastating.
Yeah, a lot of people who've snorkeled at Low Isles before and after have been really troubled to see that impact. Of course, it's still an absolutely gorgeous place to visit. Highly recommend. But we are definitely seeing the impact of increasing pollution. So let's talk a bit more about solutions. And I guess it sort of, as you've mentioned, falls into two categories. There's trying to help farmers to improve farming practices, and then the other category is stopping deforestation and replanting trees. So starting off with the farming practices, what are some of the ways that farmers can help out and reduce the runoff of nitrogen, fertiliser and other chemicals? And actually, I should mention that farmers love the reef too. One of our Patreon supporters of our radio show and podcast, our good friend Rodney, is a cane farmer from Port Douglas and from a long line of multiple generations of farmers. And he is a big supporter of our podcast and a Patreon supporter. And he also volunteers for the Marine Conservation Society. So, he's just one example that, Rodney's got a boat. He likes to go out to Low Isles. He saw the impacts himself. So, farmers love the reef too, right?
Yeah, that's right. And I've had, over the 8 years that we've been open at work, I've had multiple conversations with farmers from up on the tablelands, north, south, that have had to chat to me afterwards and told me about the practices that they're putting in place, because they realise that, Cairns only survives on two things: it's tourism and farming. So one has to help the other, and they understand that. I've had some great conversations with local farmers.
Mm-hmm. Everyone's trying to do the right thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Maybe there's a few people that are sort of...
There's a few rogues that need to be slowly moved into line, as quickly as possible. But it's important to note that there are some amazing farmers out there that are doing a great job.
That's true. So Max, what are some of the things? I mean, we've had, nearly 200 years of old school farming practices. How do we come back from that?
Yeah, it's not a very easy one, but I think the big point here is really, compared to climate change, for example, water pollution is a very local issue. And we can do everything that's in our power right here, right now, to reduce water pollution ending up in waterways and the reef. And as you said, I think many farmers genuinely are very interested in the environment and keeping it as pristine as possible. And so what we need is to obviously support them as much as possible on their way to sustainability and having less impact on the environment. And that's what many farmers want to do. As you said, maybe there's a few rogue ones, as you get always, and we do have since 2019 the reef protection regulations, which are pretty much intended just to set some very minimum basic rules to prevent some really harmful practices are sort of under control.
So just for any listeners that aren't familiar, the reef regulations are a law that was introduced in 2019, right, to enforce some minimum standards, which was a big step forward. I mean, only 6 years ago, it was kind of just trusting industry to do what they wanted, I guess. And that's great when we know that many people are doing the right thing, but unfortunately not everyone does.
Just on another note, so I know there's a fair bit of aquaculture up this way as well. Do you know much about that, or whether the impacts of that are affecting this as well?
Yeah, that's a good question. So there's, of course, the potential of aquaculture introducing, for example, nitrogen into the waterways. Yeah. But as of today, what we know is that most of them operate really well. So whatever comes out of their facilities is treated beforehand and has good water quality, so it's not a major contributor to the pollutants. What we need to do in the future, though, make sure that as we may be expanding to have more aquaculture, that they're really well located and that they're complying as the farmers have to do with the regulations to make sure that they're not contributing to the pollutant, but they're actually part of the solution too, because some of the fishing practices that we don't want out on the reef, for example, maybe trawling for prawns, aquaculture could be a good alternative.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So they get a gold Nemo sticker for their efforts then, aquaculture.
Yeah.
Good job.
Yeah, things can go pear-shaped though. I've heard a recent event where an aquaculture farm had a bit of a leak, but as Max was saying, we need to make sure that they're being regulated and compliant so those sort of things don't happen. And in that case, they can be sort of an eco-friendly alternative.
And
to
there can also be
trawling.
the risk of those animals that are bred in aquaculture getting into our natural environment too.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's a big issue if that gets into the natural world, because they're different. So, it's important.
We should definitely get someone on who's an aquaculture expert at some stage.
Yep,
so
we'll write that on the list.
We can talk about that in more detail.
Yep.
We always get so many different tangents and topics from one topic.
Yeah.
So improving farming practices is something that's been going on over time, especially since the regulations in 2019. So there can be better fertilizers, there can be better timing of the use of fertilizers to avoid those wet season floods washing them away. We can have better irrigation to reduce the nutrients and chemicals being washed off the farm into the water. And this all ends up benefiting the farmers in the long run because they do want to retain their chemicals on their farm. They don't actually want it to be washed away into the river after they've spent so much money on all these fertilizers and chemicals. They don't really want it to get washed off onto the Great Barrier Reef. But there just needs to be some certain practices, and sometimes better application machinery and methods can really help with that. But those improved farming practices can only get us so far, can't they, Max? What else do we need to do?
Yeah, exactly. As you say, there's a lot of innovation going on, and there's a lot of farmers really pushing towards really good practices, which has great outcomes for the farming business themselves. But we need those protection regulations just to keep everybody in check, because otherwise we're undermining really the good work that the ones that are leading the field, the good work they're doing. And so we just need those to have that base level. But more important than that, I guess, is since we have changed our landscape so much, there's only that far the changing farming practices can get us. So we also need to really focus to restore the critical ecosystems that we've lost.
Yeah.
That includes coastal wetlands that can act like water filters and absorb some of the nutrients. And they have really good, what we call co-benefits. So they can also increase biodiversity. They can increase cultural values for traditional owners. They can increase values for ecotourism and all of these other things. But yeah, we need to definitely have a bit of a shift in thinking, and also government investments towards more restoration, because we just have changed the landscape too much to keep pollutants out of the waterway and the reefs.
So replanting trees along streams and riverbanks is so important because they can actually soak up a lot of those nutrients from the farms and stop them from ending up in the water. And also it's a good idea for farmers if they have some land near the river that is becoming unstable and sort of unviable. By stabilising it with trees, they can actually protect their land. But also, Max, you were telling me that a lot of consumers would prefer to buy products like beef that has been grown sustainably and which isn't impacting the reef, right?
Yeah, exactly. I think that's where we're heading. It's quite common now in the beef industry that when you can label your products as sustainable and not having an impact on the environment, particularly for exporting to, for example, the European market, etc., that's an extra bonus. So it's actually something that can really support the agricultural businesses. And ultimately, that's what consumers want too. Often we maybe don't take enough time to make the conscious choice. But if you would ask somebody, you want 10 cents less cheaper sugar, but having a big impact on the reef versus you paying 10 cents more, and you know that you're doing something good at the same time, then usually the answer is quite clear. So I think that's kind of where we should be heading, and I think that's something that can really benefit the farmers as well, and that we need to continue working together. And I think you made a really good point about there's a lot of land that maybe is now very marginal, so it's maybe inundated, maybe there's some saltwater inundation because it's close to the coast, etc. And so a lot of that land is not very productive, but the farmers need some incentives, and they need to have the technical know-how, working with scientists and researchers and, for example, natural resource management groups to be able to do something really good, which could be restoring natural wetlands. They used to be there, But of course, they just can't do that on their own. So we really need to have a big focus on that in terms of investment and effort. How we can help them the best and how we can pitch in together to restore those really critical systems.
Yeah, protecting the planet is always a win-win, because if you have degraded, eroding soil, you can't grow very good crops, and it's not good for the environment either. So protecting your soil, protecting your land and your vegetation, it's a resource win as well as an environment win. So is fixing the Great Barrier Reef pollution issue both a state and a federal issue with the government, Max?
Yeah, so because it all comes down to the Great Barrier Reef World Heritage Area, and so that's a responsibility of both the federal and the Queensland state government. And in terms of water pollution, they have both investment programs for better management of reducing water pollution in the Great Barrier Reef and its catchments. And I think what's really important here, just recently they released a new strategy, a government strategy, so a joint strategy between Queensland and federal government. And that is supposed to lay out what are we going to do over the next 5 years to reduce water pollution in reef catchments. And it's just out now for public consultation, and only until Wednesday next week, actually. And I've talked to many scientists, to people from the agriculture industry, from tourism, and many environmental organizations, and everybody is quite disappointed of what has come out. And as we said earlier, we have now so much learnings from decades of trying to improve farming practices, of decades of trial and error in different programs and projects, and we've got much better knowledge about restoring ecosystems. And really good science with excellent reef scientists in Australia. So there's no excuses to come up with a very weak plan. So I think what's going to happen now is we need to have as many people have their say on this public consultation, make use of our right as citizens and organizations to have our say, and hopefully then we can have a better outcome, a better strategy that really lays out, well, what are the most important things to do, where the investments should be going over the next 5 years, and how can we get closer to these water quality targets. So they're very specific targets that have been set that both governments have committed to, but we're really not making a very fast progress towards meeting those targets.
Yeah.
The targets just mean those are levels of water pollution that the reef can handle, that the ecosystems like seagrass and corals can handle, so they're less susceptible also to the impacts from climate change.
So I've seen some of those reports come out where the government reports how they're tracking on their goals towards that World Heritage commitment to reduce water pollution on the Great Barrier Reef. And I saw that we're tracking very poorly. We're nowhere near meeting the water pollution targets, are we, Max? Where are we up to on those?
Yeah, so for some of them, we're about halfway there. But I guess the take-home message is if we do everything as we're doing it currently, in the case of nitrogen pollution, it would take us another 90 years to get there. And what Australia has promised to UNESCO to also keep it off the endangered list is to meet those targets in the next 5 years.
So we're only 85 years behind.
Gee, pick up your game.
Exactly.
Wow.
Exactly. So we need just a really clear plan for clean water. That's what we need.
Well, it makes you lose hope a bit. It's like, obviously, we're not going to be able to do it in the next 5 years, are we? Or could we? Is there something dramatic we could do within the next 5 years? I mean, just halting tree clearing is something that could be done overnight. The Environment Minister could make an announcement this afternoon and say, that's it, no more tree clearing. And that would go a long way towards helping things.
Well, it'd be a dirty great big step, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a very ambitious goal, that's for sure, considering how far we've gotten until now over the last 20 years. But we have such good knowledge now, so it's really about being very transparent on what we're doing, where we're doing, and why we're doing it. And also, we do need more investment overall. It's not going to be enough what has been invested over the last 20 years. It's probably around a quarter of what we need to invest to meet those targets. And if we want to meet 2030, then we definitely need some more public funding that goes into improving water quality in the reef. Having said that, it's super important to be transparent, but also make sure that any of that money that's being spent is highly effective. And I think we kind of owe that to the public.
Yeah, I think someone else explained this to me before. If you've got even just a car, you need to invest money into it to keep it running. If you've got something like the Great Barrier Reef, which is worth tens of billions of dollars to our economy, you need to put some of that back into it. It provides 77,000 full-time jobs. I mean, it's hard to even put a price on the value of it. Deloitte recently, in their recent economic assessment of the Great Barrier Reef, they've just updated that and said that if the Great Barrier Reef was a company, it would be the 5th largest employer in Australia. So you really need to invest in it. And like you're saying, they've only invested about a quarter of what the science shows we need to invest, especially in terms of restoring those damaged wetlands and ecosystems, which, you know, it's going to be lovely to have more trees and more wetlands and more ecosystems there, not to mention the flow-on effects to the reef.
Yeah, and the communities as well, because many of these systems obviously provide services to the communities, such as protection from cyclones and storms and flooding and everything. So it's all connected, as you said.
Yeah, it improves fisheries. Coastal wetlands are nursery grounds for fisheries. We learned about this all in last week's episode, which was all about mangroves and the huge carbon sequestration. They prevent erosion. They protect our coast from storms and storm surge, and then filtering the water before it enters the Great Barrier Reef.
It's just literally a no-brainer, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, and Max, you told me the economics weighs up, that every dollar spent on restoring coastal wetlands ends up getting way more bang for your buck than most other things that you could be pouring money into and not seeing as many results in terms of helping the reef.
Yeah, there's been some analysis coming out that just show how cost-effective restoring wetlands is, particularly to reduce water pollution, get nitrogen, for example, out of the system before it ends up in our ocean. And so that's really encouraging. And what we do need now is increased investment, but also making sure it's in the right places. You know, not every wetland is the same. Not every location is going to work the same way. So we need to use the science that we have to place them really, really well and make sure, we can really show outcomes from public investment. I think that's one of the big things for me, is that we need more transparency from our government.
What are they actually doing? How are they actually going to use the science to fix this problem? Yeah.
Exactly. What are we achieving from those investments? And everybody needs to be able to see that. And I think particularly the farmers, you know, we do owe it to them also. That the ones that are trying really hard, if they see that, you know, another 5 years from now, independently of what they did, that water quality hasn't improved significantly, then that's not a good outcome for anyone. So we need to be able to have finer scale monitoring also in the reef catchments, so farmers can actually see that their actions they're taking, you know, within a few years from now have a significant impact and significant increase in water quality. And that's what we want to see. And I think that's going to really drive them to do their best.
And that goes down to people doing what they can at home as well. You know, if people can see, get these updates on how it's working and see some sort of result, it's just going to encourage them to keep doing it, isn't it?
Yes, that's right. We've got listeners interstate and overseas, but everything you do can impact the ocean, even if you live quite far inland. So everything that goes down the drain in your shower, in your toilet, in your kitchen sink, everything that goes down the drain after you wash your car, water sewage treatment plants do some work in terms of sort of sterilising that water to make sure there's no diseases, bugs, viruses and bacteria. But they don't actually remove a lot of the chemicals. So we've seen studies where turtles have been blood tested and they found everything from the human household, including what is getting flushed down our toilets after we go to the bathroom, including human medications, contraceptions, gout medication, recreational drugs. All of those chemicals are ending up inside turtles. So be careful what products you use, you know, even rat poison if it washes down the drain, and fertilizers and pesticides. Try to choose eco-friendly products in your home. But as we've discussed, on the sort of reef-saving scale, it is mainly agriculture, as I think about 70% of all the pollution is from agriculture. Is that around the right number, Max? Yeah. So we've only got just over 5 minutes left, but the main action that needs to happen right now, there's a couple of things that the Australian Marine Conservation Society are doing, isn't there, Max? And one of them is there's a campaign to stop deforestation and tree clearing in Australia and Queensland, especially by closing the loopholes that allow tree clearing to continue, by improving our federal nature laws. So So everyone who's listening, please head to fightforourreef.org.au. There's a button you can click on called Take Action. Yeah, so click on Take Action and sign one of those petitions, because those nature laws which determine the tree clearing are being decided, could be as soon as within the next couple of weeks. So just go and sign it now before you forget, guys. Fightforourreef.org.au. And then in terms of the water pollution, more specifically, you mentioned that the government is consulting, the public consultation is now open on the water quality strategy, and you said it is very weak, and at the moment how it stands is not really going to solve the water pollution issues. So you're encouraging people to be part of that public consultation by sending in a submission. It's really easy because the Australian Marine Conservation Society just has a really great submission form on your website, don't they? Tell us about it.
Yeah, exactly. As you say, I mean, we should really take advantage of the opportunity to tell our governments they need to do a little better or a lot better. But in this case, yeah, it's just a public consultation, and we've also prepared something where people can really easily, very quickly make a submission through our website. And so that's easy, and that's really based on all of the latest scientific knowledge and working on this matter for a couple of years now, together with many stakeholders from the farming industry, with scientists, etc. So really distilled that down a few major points, and the take-home is really that we need a better plan. Our governments need to not just say, you know, we have a very broad vision for what would be nice to have, but they need to show us how we're actually going to get to meet water quality targets and protect the reef in the future. So that's really the take-home. They need a plan of how they're actually going to deliver what they're promising.
And so what people can do as well on that same website I mentioned earlier, fightforourreef.org.au, when you click on Take Action, there's one there for addressing water pollution, and that one will actually send off to the public consultation to the government. So it's really, really important, because when there's a public consultation, every single submission they receive has to be taken into consideration and read and logged as part of the consultation process. So it will make a difference. So before you forget, anyone who's listening, fightforourreef.org.au, head there right now, click Take Action, send off a submission and take this chance. They don't often consult the public on what they're going to do about pollution. It only comes around every now and then, not very often. So take that chance now, because we need urgent action within the next few years, don't we, Max?
Let's get onto it.
Yes.
Exactly.
All right, well, we've only got 2 minutes left, so I think we'll wrap it up there. Dr. Max Hirschfeld, Great Barrier Reef Water Quality Manager at the Australian Marine Conservation Society. Thanks so much for all your amazing work, and thanks for joining us on Word on the Reef today.
Thanks so much for having me. Now I can put those lederhosen back on.
Thanks, Max. It's been great. Have a great day.
Thank you. You too.
Thanks, buddy.
And thanks to you, all our listeners, for joining us on Word on the Reef. I'm Tanya Murphy. My co-host is Brett Goodban, and we will be back on Cairns FM 89.1 next Friday at 10 a.m. with more awesome marine science adventures. Don't forget, you can follow us on Instagram, or even send us a message on Instagram if you have any questions or any suggestions or requests for topics at instagram.com/wordonthereefpodcast. That's all for this week. Best fishes.
Have a fantastic week, guys. See you next week.
See you next time.
Bye.